This is Leadership Beyond, your community of conversation.
But this is the first time in my professional career that everybody, 100% of us, are consciously aware we are engaged in the change initiative.
Yeah, everything. I mean, COVID caused us all to go through change, right? At the same time, but our experiences were so different.
Facing these unprecedented times in isolation is pure insanity.
Hi, everyone. Adrian here. Just jumping in to introduce an episode from The Vault. We're going way back to 2022 when we met with Olivier Aries, who is a certified practitioner with Predictive Index and focuses most specifically around engagement in the workplace. The reason we're bringing up this particular episode with Olivier is because Tom and I are excited to be planning a new panel discussion series that's all focused around engagement. So this episode is a nice lead in to that panel series. Olivier does a great job of defining engagement for us and talking about why it's so important to pay attention to and what we should be doing about it and how we should be focusing. These are all things that we'll be digging into in more depth as we have our panel discussion coming up specifically around engagement. So have another listen, and we're excited to bring this to you and bring you the panel series in the future. Olivier Aries is a management consultant, corporate entrepreneur, venture entrepreneur, and advisor, and a Harvard Business School grad. He's passionate about mixing human behavior, business transformation, design thinking, and empathy to help organizations build and implement new services and businesses, and to create positive, motivating cultures that embrace change and free everyone's creativity and innovation skills.
One of the things that really struck me in this conversation is Olivier telling us to be sure we're ready to act on the data that comes up through the engagement. It's too easy to say, we need to have an engagement survey. And you lose credibility if people invest the time to answer questions as fully and honestly as they can, and then see that nothing happens with it. So that really brought that forward, is to say, why are you doing it? And are you willing to do something as best you can with whatever's uncovered?
One thing that really resonated with me about this conversation, specifically around the Predictive Index platform, the engagement diagnose tool within it, is that an engagement survey provides an insight to the broader culture of the organization, but also this tool drills down into the subcultures and the activities of teams specifically in a way where the insights are meaningful and you can take action in a digestible way. Welcome, Olivier.
Good afternoon, Olivier. Thanks for joining us.
Good afternoon, Tom. How are you?
Good, thanks.
So nice to have you here with us, Olivier. Thanks again for joining us. So we are specifically going to jump right in and talk about the tool that we're all certified practitioners of and partners of, which is Predictive Index. And today specifically, we want to go into the diagnose component of Predictive Index. But before we jump into those details about engagement, would you please share a little bit about your background and how you came to be so involved with Predictive Index?
Of course, Adrian, and thank you for having me this afternoon with you. Well, I would probably describe myself as a consultant at heart. I've worked for nearly 20 years as a management consultant in a large global firm. And in that firm, I was mostly focused on what we used to call large-scale transformation programs, which would be helping Fortune 500 companies execute major change in their organization, their processes, their work model. So examples of that type of work would to outsource or offshore entire functions and look at performance optimization and cost reduction and upskilling and things like this. And so I was doing a lot of change management. And I would say, no matter how hard and how effective our processes and our approaches to change were, I'd always felt there was a bit of an element missing. And it wasn't until I came across the Predictive Index that I realized that the element that was missing was people. Right? We used to think of change at a systemic level, but we were never really able to get down to the level of individuals or at least groups of people. So I was lucky enough to literally bump into Daniel Muskies, who's one of the owners and current leaders of the Predictive Index. We were consultants on a pro bono project together. And I got familiar with PI, kind of fell in love with the tool, as I think many users do. And I ended up joining the Predictive Index as a VP of professional services a few years ago. That's my journey into the world of people analytics, I suppose.
That's wonderful. And I can relate very closely to running change management initiatives and seemingly being the only one who was worried about the people, right? So many people on the project focused on the system or the process, and then here I was in the, on the side saying, but wait, there's people at the end of that. We have to get them where you want them to go, and how do we go about doing that? And I think you're right. A big piece of what I do is pulling in that people focus to major change initiatives. And Predictive Index is a data driven way of doing that better. For the first time, that I've seen, we have real data that can help us to drive the change. So today we are talking specifically again about the diagnose component of Predictive Index, which is all about engagement of people within an organization. So before we do that, can you just from your perspective, your point of view, how you define engagement and why it's so important to measure it?
That's a good question. There's probably so many ways to define engagement. I think one way of doing this would be to say that so that represents the discretionary effort that employees will put above and beyond, showing up for work and doing the minimum amount of effort to not get essentially laid off. So that's the amount of energy, attention, creativity that they will put because they feel a connection to the company, they feel a connection to their work, they feel a connection to any other element that makes them motivated to go above and beyond what others would consider the strict minimum. That would be my way of looking at engagement. And I would say when you look at data, I think it's clear that engagement has been abysmal for many years. I'd say probably for the past 20 years or so, engagement has been stubbornly low. When you look at data, in particular, I tend to look at data from a company called Energage, who tracks engagement for very large organizations, so companies who presumably already have a bit of a progressive mindset towards talent. But you see that despite the bump we saw in the early stages of the pandemic in early 2020, when I think there was this effect of all trying to fight the same threat together, and this sort of banding together effect, this brotherhood or sisterhood effect, which created that spike in engagement. After that, it came back to pre-COVID levels. In fact, I think in 21 and 2022 so far, as I've seen, engagement continues to be very low at the same historically low level that we've seen for many years.
So you mentioned about PI being a tool to take the people strategy into account. If you can move a little bit from the definition of engagement to the people strategy, which obviously includes getting higher engagement.
Yeah, I think there's something that's very tricky about engagement, which we have to kind of put on the table, is that you actually can't directly impact engagement. In fact, if you look at the Predictive Index tool, which they call the Employee Engagement Survey, there are 4 questions that are truly related to measuring engagement. And if I tell you what those questions are, it's going to become obvious that you actually can't do anything about engagement itself. So you have to act elsewhere to impact engagement. And the questions that truly relate to engagement are things like, are you proud to work here? Would you recommend this company to others, friends or family? Are you happy to work here? Would it take a lot for you to leave this company? So these are kind of in the moment feelings and impression that you just can influence. You're not going to build people pride in their company kind of on the spot like this. There's no magic wand you can have to do this. So what you have to understand is what drives engagement or what causes poor engagement. And these are the levers upstream that you can influence. And if you do this, then one of the outcomes, among others, will be higher engagement. And in the world of PI, the 4 levers that you can act on that truly impact engagement are the job. So do people feel that they're a good fit for the job? Do they feel comfortable that they can perform in their daily tasks? Managers, do they have good managers who care, who develop them, who provide the right amount of guidance and support? What's the level of collaboration? So how well are the different parts of the organization working well together? And 4th would be what I call organization in general, including things like, does the leadership pay attention to employees? Is there a feeling that they care about people? Is there clarity about the strategy? Is there confidence in the leadership that they can manage change when it happens? And so on and so on. So those 4 dimensions, jobs, managers, collaboration, or team dynamics, and organization as a whole, those are the 4 elements that will ultimately condition engagement. Frankly, in my book, those 4 drivers, I know PI calls them drivers for engagement or disengagement, but for me, they're really more about execution. If you give people the right environment to perform, if you put them in jobs that they're well suited for, if you have good managers, if there's great focus on collaboration and communication, if there's clarity on the goals of the organization, you give people the right environment to perform and to execute. So for me, it's really about, do we give people the right environment to perform, the right environment to execute? And if we do, then naturally, of course, they're going to be more engaged.
If they're a right fit and you pay attention to the culture, the engagement will go up.
Right. And you might look at it the other way and say, even the best people for the job, placed in a terrible environment, toxic environment with poor attention to execution and processes and norms, even those best people will perform poorly. You need to have the right people, and you need to give them the right context for them to operate at their peak performance.
It's a combination of both at the organizational culture level and at the individual level.
Absolutely. You need both.
Yeah. So how does the tool diagnose use Predictive Index to help people come up with a strategy to create the environment you're talking about?
Mm-hmm. Well, before we go there, I think it's important to highlight the conditions for success of even running an engagement survey, because I truly think you have to handle this with care. Normally, I tell my clients, you'd rather do something poorly but do it rather than not doing anything. In fact, PI themselves, one of the PI's values as a company are errors of action are better than errors of inaction. And I would say it's nearly always true. But when it comes to engagement, I think that's the one case example where you'd rather not do it than doing it poorly. Because when you when you use any sort of instrument to ask employees about their experience, ask them what's going well, what needs to be done better, you create this expectation for change. Well, first of all, you create the expectation that these people will be heard, that their voice matters. And then, of course, that you're going to take action based on whatever they're telling you. So you can't start that process without the commitment to listen and to do something about what you hear. If you just go through the motion and asking employees about their experience just because that's what everybody else is doing in your network, then just don't do it, because you're going to make matters worse if you don't have a true commitment to pay attention, be humble about the results, and take action. So in this case, I truly think that there has to be a couple of conditions for success. One is that the leadership of the company is willing to listen to what employees are saying. And it sounds kind of obvious, but I know a handful of examples where leaders claim that they care for employees' opinion, and they just don't. Or maybe they do, but there's something else more important that's going to supersede that desire. So leaders have to be willing to listen to employees. Second, the organization has to have some capacity for action. Right? So leaders want to listen to to what employees are saying. But let's say, for example, they are in high growth or some sort of transformation and resources are very stretched. There's no time for nothing. And although they would really like to make some changes or take action based on the employees' feedback, there's just no bandwidth. Their own mental bandwidth is stretched. There's no resources available to even put a plan together. If that capacity for action isn't there, again, might rather not do anything and just wait for when the circumstances are more favorable. And there's a couple of other conditions, but I would say those two are really critical.
So let me make sure I'm clear on this. What you're suggesting is, before we do a survey just to do a survey, we have a strategy which includes how likely are we to be able to execute around whatever observations come up, and
Exactly.
really get committed to it, rather than just do the engagement thing, which a lot of people have done. And by the way, you remind me of some of these customer service surveys. You just have a feeling that this data goes into a black hole somewhere. You don't really feel like they say, we care about you. Well, those are words. So I really like that, is really have a strategy. Where are we trying to go, and how willing are we to really respond? And I would add, the same is true with 360 feedback. If you're just doing it, people aren't going to give you good data to begin with. Thank you for that.
Yeah, you really can't just talk the talk with this, right? I think it's just to echo what you're saying, Olivier. It's more impactful to do something and to do the survey, to get the feedback and take no action, than to just not ask the questions at all, right? Because that's sending a louder message of, we're
Sure.
told we should care about this. So we'll put this out there, but do we care?
That's true. And I'm not saying that many leaders don't go into this with the best interest. Most of them do. But the reality is, especially these days, it's just hard to find the mental space to face a new set of data and consider changes that in some cases might be significant, or reconsider people, some members of your management team or managers and things like this. So it's a real effort. And I would say you can also be authentic and true to yourself as a leader if you decide that it's just not the right time. I think it's okay to tell your employees, listen, I really care. I really want to improve things around here, because I know that many parts of the way we work are broken. But I just don't trust that even if we do it, we're going to have the capacity to make any meaningful change that matters to you. So I'd rather keep our heads down for, I don't know, another 6 months maybe. And, I commit to, launch an initiative like this later. But right now, I think it would be counterproductive to all of us. And if it comes from, a place of honesty, I think employees will acknowledge, because they don't want to waste their time either filling out questionnaires that go nowhere.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think that's fair. It's that communication loop, right? You're
Mhm.
asking the questions, you got the feedback. Yes, you want to respond to it in some way, even if responding is, I heard you, and we'll continue working on this to have an action plan to respond and make some changes reflective of the feedback we're receiving. But right now, we have this work to do. So bear with us, right? That's very important. I think that's a critical thing to say. Too many times that we solicit information, and the engagement scores, yes, at a big level, but even just more casually, you solicit for feedback and then do nothing about it. And it could be as simple as saying, here's a summary of the feedback we received, and here's our thoughts around it, and what that commitment is go forward. I see that a lot of times in change initiatives. We get to our success measures and we measure, but do we respond to those measurements?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So, does predictive index give us any insight to what kind of action should be taken based on the feedback that it provides, that it
It-
collects?
yeah, and I think it's actually the one of the main, one of the sort of strong uh, sort of elements of strengths of that particular tool. And there's, many tools out there in the marketplace around engagement. The simplest would be for a client to go into SurveyMonkey and, put together their own survey, which I know some people do, and maybe that's a good first step. In fact, often that's a good springboard to realize that, it's not a good approach, and there's only so much that you can capture by having these sort of jury-rigged solutions. But so going back to PI, yes, I think there's a couple of unique aspects to this tool, which I think are partially effective. One is exactly this: it's the bias for action. Uh, just like everything else that PI does, I think the diagnose tool is pretty simple. It's simple to implement, but even more importantly, I think it's simple to analyze and make sense of. And that's important for the second sort of strength of the tool, which is, while a number of the recommendations or actions will be under the responsibility of the leadership, and things like clarity of the communication and ability to communicate the strategy and things like this, they only the leadership of the organization can do something about them. But the vast majority of the recommendations tend to focus on teams and on managers. So the tool breaks down engagement and execution results by team. So if you have an organization with, let's say, 10 managers or 10 directors who overlook 10 different departments, then the tool will produce 11 reports, one report for the entire organization, and then one report for each of the different division heads. So the results can be analyzed at the team level, and if in turn managers report to those directors, as long as there's at least 5 respondents on the team, then this particular team, and therefore their manager, will also have reports. So you can get to a very granular level in the organization, and many of the challenges and opportunities will be developed at the manager level, which means that the tool really does empower managers to get access to, to understand the sort of execution environment they're creating for their own teams, therefore how engaged their team is, and be equipped with a set of recommendations that are actually automatically generated by the software based on the results, so that every manager can start to make changes at their own level. So earlier you said, we have to think at the level of the system and at the level of the individual. Well, that's exactly what Diagnose or the Employee Experience Survey, which is the official name of this tool, That's exactly what it does. It provides an overview of execution capabilities for the entire organization, and they empower managers to understand what's going on within their own sphere of influence, which of course is much, much narrower than the overall organization. So you give managers a chance, an opportunity to understand what's going on and do something about it. So there's also I think, an assumption behind this tool, a fundamental principle, which is the entrusting managers into their own ability to make things better for their team and for the entire organization on an aggregate level. So bias for action, delegation of action to managers for a large part, and simplicity, I think, would be the three probably defining elements of this particular tool.
So if you have a small team within the larger organization, using the individual data of the team members helps get a communication strategy for that team to increase the engagement. Is that understanding it properly? So you say each
Yeah,
team
absolutely, yes.
leader, make sure I understand it, has a report, and she might have a particular noticeable issue and can create communication that works for the work styles of the individual members.
It is correct. So if you think about this a bit more, that really creates a lot of opportunities for development, because so each of the managers will have their own report and their own data and their own action plan, if you will. At least there's an action plan that's proposed, and of course they can sort of dig deeper in the data and modulate and tune the actions based on whatever they think is appropriate. But because at the aggregate level, the leadership team can also see the relative performance of all of the managers and teams from an execution standpoint and an engagement standpoint. Then you can start to benchmark teams internally, not in a way of John really underperforms compared to Janice, but rather through the lens of, hey, maybe there's something that this particular manager can learn from, I don't know, Janice, because Janice obviously is doing something great, let's say with the job fit of the people on her team. And that's an area where John seems to be performing less favorably. So why don't we have them work together, even put together some sort of buddy system where they can coach each other, because every manager has probably something to share and teach to their peers. So if you do this well, you can really create this culture of development learning grounded in data, grounded in honesty, in transparency, so that every manager and every team, and therefore every team member, gets a chance to contribute to improving their own experience and improving the experience of the whole. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Clear.
This really goes far beyond an engagement set of data, because you can click into a team style. So am I interpreting that right? If I'm a leader and I have a team of 5 people and they've all gotten profiles, predictive index profiles, and as a team, I'm looking at them collectively as that team, because it's anonymous information, right? So you can't double click into
Absolutely,
somebody's
of course.
specific results. But if you look at them as a team and you have your engagement feedback with a suggested response, suggested action, but looking at those recommended actions in line with how your team shows up together as a team, like that's powerful stuff, because you're adding data to being able to more succinctly decide what are the activities to move the needle on engagement for the individuals on my team, not just a blanket recommendation based on a generic engagement result. Try
That's
this,
absolutely
try that. It's very specific.
that's absolutely true. And so I think that's also the value. And I feel like I'm shamelessly pitching PI, but the reality is that this tool is quite powerful. Uh,
Yeah.
So think about this. If you use the employee experience survey that we've talked about over the past few minutes, you create this database around execution and around engagement. And now, as we said, every manager is accountable for analyzing the data, communicating the data to their own team, because that's the least that team members deserve. They've answered the question, so now they want to hear what's going to be done about it. And then those managers have to put together an action plan. And you might say, this provides the what it is that we're doing right, what it is that is broken, and what it is that we can improve. Then there's the how do we do this? And that's where you can combine this employee experience survey with the rest of the typical behavioral data that PI provides, including, Adrian, as you're saying, information about the team type, the team character, if you will. Like teams are just like individuals, at least from a behavioral standpoint. Through the lens of PI data, you can essentially analyze a team as you would analyze a person, with their strengths and their blind spots. So if the managers have the result of the employee experience survey, which defines what do we need to do, and they can combine this with data about themselves and their own team, then that helps them define the how we get there. I'll give you an example, which actually is pulled from a client I'm sort of working with right now. Small manufacturing company, a very specific sector. And the company was bought by the current owner, and he is in the process of making some changes that part of his organization is resisting. And one of the assumptions that we have is that it's the situation is what it is because the people in that organization tend to have a very specific type of profile that tends to be very focused on process and precision. So people who value stability, who value structure, who value predictability, who value understanding what's next. People who likes to do one thing at a time. They're not really good at multitasking. They need to understand what the journey is going to be through all of its different steps. So once you know that a team is like this, then that gives you, if you're the manager or the business owner, that gives you a bit of a flight plan as to how do I make the case for change? How do I communicate? What's the pace and the speed at which I can bring the team along? What are the traits of my communication, the traits of our kind of collective journey that will be most appreciated? Clearly, I have to lay out the plan, because if every Monday morning at the staff meeting I bring something new, people just freak out because they need to understand how things will unfold. So if you have access to that sort of data, now you can work with the team, meet them where they are in terms of behavior, character, expectation, so that whatever recommendation comes out of the customer experience survey can really be implemented with the full support of the team, their full participation, and everybody wins. The team wins because finally they're heard in a way that's actionable, and the manager wins too because she knows how to communicate the results of the survey. She knows how to take action based on how the team's going to react and what's going to be the best way for the team to embrace the change process. So when you combine the two, you really maximize the chances. You remove a lot of the risk that is typically associated with change.
The word predictive just got amplified, which is how likely is this communication to help a group of people move from point A to point B? And one of the problems with mass communication is we fail to recognize that one communication isn't going to equally impact. And I've seen this where they say, well, did you inform the team of this? And they said, yes, I emailed them last Tuesday, as though the fact that you hit send means that it's done. And so what keeps coming up from every example you give is both the universal and the particular, creating a we and then recognizing that we have a collective type and we have individual types, and we need to pay attention to both. I love that. Thank you.
Powerful stuff. That is, that's a little mind blowing when I think about it that way. When I think of engagement surveys and change initiatives that I've been a part of without the benefit of this kind of data, and it seems so obvious that how it why it fell down. If you don't have that kind of insight, you're guessing, right? So why guess?
And so in the first case that Olivier had about sometimes they're not ready,
Yeah.
even if they're well-intentioned, sometimes you get the data and you go, now what? And what's obvious is that we're falling short, and this brings back to execution. But what isn't obvious is how can we raise it up? And I think this tool will help you to do that, to have a strategy.
Yeah, sometimes I'm sort of puzzled as to why more executives or leaders don't actually rest on the data that PI provides to actually eliminate or evacuate a lot of the anxiety, the stress, the tension that comes from seeing that sort of data and then realizing that not everything's fine, in this organization, and that's okay. In fact, I was lucky enough to be part of the team who developed this tool several years ago, and I was also part of the team who piloted it with a few volunteer clients, which was a really fun experience, of course, to see the tool that we developed in action and start to see how people were embracing it. And I have to say, that's where we quickly realized that you have to have those conditions for success that I mentioned earlier in the conversation, because there's at least two situations, and one in particular really kind of vividly, where the leadership, when faced with the data, kind of recoiled from the narrative, right? Recoiled from the insights, and you see things that after a while we realized would be sometimes the expected behavior when the leadership wasn't ready. Things like rationalizing the insight. Oh, yeah, this team's struggling, but we know why, right? That's because, Nathan, their manager, has been around forever, and every insight they're going to come up with their own rationale as to why there's a good reason to not do anything, right? And it's kind of
it's
minimizing.
narrative based rather than
Yeah,
data based.
yeah. So, and by the way, one thing that we had to do something about this, because we didn't want that reaction to happen, at least not to happen often. So one thing that we actually scripted in the field manual, if you will, that consultants use when they help their clients roll out a tool like this. One of which was to say, while the survey is being taken by employees, which is typically a 2-week period, you should sit down with the client and walk them through the survey using fake data. In fact, PI has put together kind of a fake client example that looks and feels like a real survey, but just as fictitious data. And we did this so that we could habituate, if you will, the client to read the data without the high emotional tension of looking at their own data. Because one thing that we also realize is that sometimes clients would push back against the results by questioning the methodology or the science, right? And while the science is very robust, these are conversations that are hard to have on the spot, right? It's hard to convince somebody that something's right. without having a lengthy conversation about the methodology. So to avoid this, we advise consultants to first run clients through the approach, the methodology, as if it were the data of their company, but without this extra challenge. So we help them understand the process, so that when the survey is done, and now we can do the same exercise by showing them the actual data, we essentially take them away the possibility for them to question the approach, because they've already seen it before, they've already endorsed it, they were like, oh yes, I'm clear, I understand, blah, blah, blah. And now you have one less reason for them to discount the data. And sometimes you have to, it's a bit of tough love, right? Sometimes you have to help clients go through the pain of realizing that, yeah, parts of the organization struggle. There's some friction in parts that maybe they knew before or they ignored before. All this for their benefit ultimately, because everybody win. Many of those clients are business owners, so it's their best interest to have an organization that runs well, despite the pain of having to realize that it's not the case. So we're trying to guide and prod clients into accepting the results, embracing the recommendations, and help them do something about it.
It will
Well,
come out sooner or later, right? So better to hear it sooner than later, because when you find out about it later, it's much more devastating, I think, to the organization, because that's when, people start leaving, or it's much bigger problems now when they become that obvious. But if you can get ahead of it and have an open mind to
Yeah,
take that in.
yeah, but that's I'm sure you've seen, you've been in those conversations where, for example, a symptom of low engagement is high attrition, right? High turnover. Um, if people are not engaged, if they don't like their manager, if they don't like the company, of course, especially these days, although it's slowing down a bit, but these days they're going to see if the grass is greener elsewhere. But it's easy to discount turnover, even if you're the ones, on the wrong side of it, and you're losing employees left and right. It's easy to rationalize by saying, oh, my competitors are poaching, or I don't have enough, margin to pay more, or those people should be more grateful. But when you suddenly understand why there's this high attrition, because there's specific issues that relate to your organization, it's much harder to push back and rationalize, right? It's written here. So that's why it takes a bit of courage for leaders to be willing to embrace that sort of exercise, because they might see those things that can't be rationalized away anymore.
so if you only had 3 minutes left in a conversation, what would you leave the audience with?
Well, that's an excellent question. You're putting me on the spot here,
I
Tom.
am putting you on the spot. Pension Management 101, because we are running out of time and there's so many questions going through my mind, but we do have to close this conversation out.
Well, I'll going back to some real basics of leadership. I think the way I like to define leadership is to say a good leader is self-aware, is aware of others, and is aware of their goals, so that they can communicate those, of course. And I would say many leaders, I think, have done the work of self-awareness. I think increasingly so. But the work of building awareness across the entire organization, that I think is an interesting stretch. And when you think about this, running a tool like the Employee Experience Survey, it's really building this awareness of what's going on in my own organization with nearly the same degree of insight and accuracy as I will have about myself if I use a tool like the behavioral assessment from PI. So if you do it for yourself and to develop yourself, why not do it for at the scale of your entire organization? And that's really what the tool does, with the added benefit that you're not even accountable for all of the recommendations that are going to come out of it. As a leader, there's some action that clearly will be under your purview. But if you use a tool like PI, then you will naturally be sort of driven to empower your managers and the rest of your executive team to analyze and execute the recommendations. So you have the best of both worlds. You get the insight and the pathway to unlock a lot of upside in your organization. And the action of doing this is not even something that you're going to be responsible for. You're going to be accountable for it, of course, but you can delegate that action to the rest of your team, which is also another way of improving your organization by increasing the amount of learning and empowerment to your managers and leaders. So when you think about this, there's very few reasons that are valid, except, as we said before, just the lack of bandwidth for action that would justify not doing it.
That is truly a leadership beyond. Thank you so much for joining us, Olivier.
Well said. Great wrap up.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Adrienne.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Leadership Beyond podcast. We hope you benefited from this conversation as much as we have. We invite you to join our community of conversation. Subscribe to our podcast on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Don't forget to sign up at aleadershipbeyond.com for free materials and updates. That's aleadershipbeyond.com. Join us in 2 weeks for our next episode.